When that key turned in my door's lock at 3 in the morning, I realized that buying my dream home was just the start of my problems. But let's go back a few weeks. My name's Jack Sullivan, I'm 52, and I fix up old furniture for a living. After Elaine passed away, our house in Chicago became too big for me and my memories. I needed a fresh start. When I found that 1912 Victorian house in the Oakwood Hills neighborhood, with its original wood framing and stained glass windows, I knew it was exactly what I was looking for. A quiet place, full of history in its walls, and with enough room for my workshop. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get more stories like this. The move went smoothly. I spent the first few days setting up my workspace in the garage and planning all the fixes the house needed. It was on the 5th day that she showed up. A woman in her mid-60s with perfectly styled silvering hair, wearing a navy blue outfit that looked like it came straight out of a 90s catalog. Mr. Sullivan, I'm Patricia Reynolds from the Oakwood Hills Neighborhood Council. I came by personally to welcome you and let you know about our community guidelines. She handed me a folder full of documents. I flipped through it quickly. There were rules about exterior paint colors, fence heights, lawn mowing times, bans on commercial vehicles parked on the street, and even a list of approved plants for front gardens. Thanks for the visit, Mrs. Reynolds. But when I bought this property, my lawyer confirmed that there's no homeowners association with legal jurisdiction here. Her smile faltered for a second. Oh, it's not a legal matter, Mr. Sullivan. It's about tradition. About preserving the historic character that makes Oakwood Hills special. Every neighbor here follows these guidelines. I appreciate your concern, but I plan to respect the original style of the house. That's what attracted me here, after all. She pressed her lips together for a moment before smiling again. Of course, but I hope you'll consider our suggestions. It'd be a shame if your beautiful restoration ended up clashing with the community standard. I didn't like the way she stressed those last words, so I simply thanked her for the visit and said goodbye. The next week, I started fixing the porch railing. I was sanding the wood when I noticed a figure out of the corner of my eye. There was Patricia, standing on the sidewalk silently watching. When I waved, she just turned and walked away. That happened a few more times. She'd appear at random moments, always watching. One night, coming back from a delivery, I found an envelope attached to the door. It read, "Violation notice, front porch." There wasn't any official signature, just a list of violations about my restoration. 3 days later, I woke up startled at 3 in the morning. A noise at the front door got my attention. When I went downstairs, I saw the doorknob slowly turning. Someone was trying to break in with a key. I flipped on the porch light immediately, and the noise stopped. Through the side window, I saw Patricia hurrying away. The next morning, I called a locksmith and changed all the locks. I also put up a small camera on the porch connected to my phone. That investment paid off because 2 days later I got another notification. It was Patricia again, this time checking the side windows of my house, trying to peek inside. It became clear that I needed to take more precautions. I installed 3 more cameras, put up motion sensor lights, and set up a basic alarm system. I didn't want to turn my dream home into a fortress, but Patricia seemed determined not to leave me alone. A week later, I heard a loud knock on my door. 2 men in suits showed up saying they were municipal inspectors. "We received a complaint about possible structural and historical violations on the property," said the taller one. "Do you have an official warrant?" I asked calmly. They exchanged awkward glances. "Well, actually, it's just a preliminary visit based on an anonymous complaint. In that case, I'm sorry, but you need to come back with the proper documentation. This is private property." They seemed relieved not to continue. As they left, I saw Patricia watching from across the street, arms crossed and with a look of disapproval. I was hit by the smell before I even opened the door. It was a Tuesday morning when I went out to get the newspaper and was greeted by a nauseating odor coming from the flower bed. Partially buried under my freshly planted hydrangeas was a meat package. Pork ribs, I think, in an advanced state of decay. I grabbed a shovel from the garage, removed it, and took photos before tossing it in the trash. While cleaning up, I noticed something shiny on the lawn. A gold bracelet with the initials PR engraved on it. Later that afternoon, a delivery guy arrived with 4 huge boxes from an online store. "Mr. Sullivan, we have your order for imported porcelain." I'd never ordered that, but my name and address were on the form. The charge was $3,785.89 to my credit card. I refused the delivery, and then spent the next hour on the phone with the store and my bank to cancel the fraudulent transaction. I started keeping a detailed journal of every incident, attaching photos, video recordings from my cameras, and copies of documents. I saved everything digitally and sent copies to my email and my lawyer, Harold. This could turn into a serious case of stalking and harassment, he said when he saw the growing amount of evidence. The next day, I got 5 food deliveries I hadn't ordered, 3 pizzas, some Thai food, and deli sandwiches, all in my name. I explained the situation to the delivery folks, who looked confused but understanding. I even offered to pay for the inconvenience, but they refused. One of them said, "This isn't the first strange case in this neighborhood." On Friday, I came home from the supermarket to find 3 letters in my mailbox. One was a cancellation notice for my home insurance due to multiple unprocessed complaints. The second was a subpoena to appear in court for damaging neighboring property. The third was a flyer from a funeral home offering pre-planning for those inevitable moments. They were all clumsy forgeries, but very disturbing. I called the police to file a formal complaint, but Sergeant Fisher didn't seem very interested. "Look, Mr. Sullivan, without concrete evidence of who's doing this, there isn't much we can do. Maybe it's just a string of unfortunate coincidences." "And what about the bracelet with the initials PR?" I asked. PR could mean anything. Paulo Roberto, Paula Rodriguez. It isn't enough proof. I thanked him, not very enthusiastically, and hung up. I clearly needed to gather more evidence to be taken seriously. The real tipping point happened one Wednesday night. I was working on an oak dresser in the garage when all the lights went out, not just in my house but on the entire street. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the power meter at the back of the property. The box was open, and the main breaker was off. Shining my light on the ground, I saw fresh footprints in the damp soil all around. I turned the breaker back on, and instead of heading inside right away, I walked around the perimeter with my flashlight. That's when I saw 2 figures moving quickly through the neighbor's yard. One was unmistakably Patricia, with her signature blue coat, and the other was a man I'd never seen before. The cameras caught everything. The next morning, I reviewed the footage carefully. Patricia and the unknown man were seen approaching the power box. He was fiddling with something while she kept an eye out, and both of them quickly ran off when the lights came back on. I exported the videos and saved them in multiple places. That afternoon, while I was at the public library researching historical property laws, I got an alert on my security system. The same man from the night before was in my yard, trying to open the back door. I immediately called the police and drove home as fast as I could. When I got there, the man was already gone, but the lock was damaged. About 20 minutes later, 2 different officers, not the ones I'd spoken with earlier, arrived. I showed them the recordings from both that night and earlier that day. "I recognize this guy," said the younger officer, pointing at the screen. "He's Donovan Miller. He's got a record for home invasion and vandalism." The other officer looked more skeptical. "And you're sure the woman is your neighbor?" "Absolutely. I have several recordings of her on my property at odd hours, not to mention all the other incidents." I showed them my complete chronological file, including the bracelet found near the rotten meat. The officers exchanged looks. "Well, that changes things," said the older one. "We need copies of all this evidence." The next morning, I was having my coffee when I heard a knock at the door. It was Patricia, wearing a look of fake concern. "Jack, dear, I heard you had some trouble last night. I just wanted to check if you were all right." "I'm fine, Patricia. The police are investigating the break-in. In fact, they identified the guy in my security footage." Her smile faltered for a moment. "Footage? Good thing you have that security system, even though it's a shame it comes to this in such a quiet neighborhood." "I agree. That's why I'm so worried about what's been happening. By the way, they found a bracelet near that spoiled meat dumped in my yard. It has the initials PR. I thought it might be yours." Her face went visibly pale. "That's ridiculous. I'm just trying to be a good neighbor, and you're implying I'd be involved in vandalism? Maybe you just aren't used to the pace of life in Oakwood Hills. Or maybe Oakwood Hills needs to get used to the idea that private homeowners deserve peace and privacy." She abruptly turned and left, muttering something about consequences. 2 days later, I was woken up at 6 in the morning by a police car pulling into my driveway. I got down the steps still in my robe, and Sergeant Fisher was at the door. "Mr. Sullivan, we received a complaint about a nighttime disturbance coming from your house. Apparently there was a party with loud music until 5 in the morning." "Sergeant, that's completely false. I live alone and have been asleep since 10. I've got security cameras that can prove there was no activity in the house." Fisher looked uncomfortable. "Well, the complaint came from Mrs. Reynolds." She sounded very convincing. "I'm sure she did. By any chance, have you looked into her connections with Donovan Miller, the guy who tried to break into my house?" "We're working on it, sir." While we were talking, a car pulled up on the other side of the street. Patricia got out. along with two men. I recognized one of them as Donovan. The three then started walking in our direction. "Sergeant," I said quietly, "that's the guy from my footage, and he's coming here with Mrs. Reynolds right now." Fisher turned and watched the group approach. He reached for his radio and said something I couldn't quite catch. Patricia waved and smiled at the officer as if they were old friends. "Good morning, Sergeant Fisher. I see you're already handling the complaint. I hope Mr. Sullivan understands that here in Oakwood Hills, we value peace and quiet." Fisher looked from Patricia to the two men. "Mrs. Reynolds, can you tell me who these gentlemen are?" "Oh, they're just friends who are concerned about the situation. Mr. Sullivan's been difficult ever since he arrived." "And what's the name of the gentleman to your right?" Fisher asked, already knowing the answer. Patricia hesitated for the first time. "This is Don, a family friend." "Donovan Miller?" Fisher asked directly to the man. The man froze and shot a glance at Patricia. At that moment, a second police car turned the corner and pulled up behind Patricia's car. Two officers quickly got out. "I think we've got a lot to talk about, Mrs. Reynolds," said Fisher. "And Mr. Miller, you have an arrest warrant for violating probation. It'd be best if all of you come with me to the station." Patricia's expression changed in a flash from confidence to panic. "This is ridiculous. I've been a respected member of this community for 30 years, and yet you hired a convicted criminal to intimidate your neighbor," Fisher replied. "That isn't exactly respectable behavior." As the officers led the trio to the patrol cars, Fisher turned to me. "Mr. Sullivan, we'll need your official statement today, and all the evidence you collected. Of course I'll be there. Should I bring my lawyer?" "That'd be wise." I watched as the police cars drove away, with Patricia in the back, staring at me through the window. Years of control over the neighborhood were crumbling right before her eyes, and she knew exactly who to blame. The county courthouse was an imposing red brick building with white columns and a staircase that seemed never-ending. I sat in the third row of the courtroom, watching Patricia in her orange municipal jail uniform. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the 3 weeks since her pre-trial detention. Her hair, once perfectly dyed and styled, now showed gray roots and was tied in a messy bun. My lawyer, Harold, sat next to me, methodically organizing documents in his briefcase. "The prosecutor is confident," he whispered. "The evidence is undeniable." Judge Tompkins, a tall man with white hair and a stern expression, came into the room. After the initial procedures, the formal hearing began. Donovan Miller had already worked out a deal, confessing that Patricia had paid him to intimidate me and potentially force me out of the neighborhood. He accepted a lighter sentence in exchange for his testimony. When it was my turn to testify, I walked up to the witness stand feeling the weight of Patricia's gaze. As I recounted every incident in order, from the rotten meat to the fake deliveries, from the break-in attempts to the blackout, her face fluctuated between a mask of indignation and moments of sheer hatred. The prosecutor showed the security footage of Patricia and Donovan on my property, as well as the bracelet with her initials found near the spoiled meat. He also presented testimony from 3 other former residents who had left the neighborhood after similar experiences. "Mr. Sullivan, did Mrs. Reynolds ever explicitly threaten your safety?" the prosecutor asked. "Not exactly with those words," I replied. "She would hint at things. It'd be a shame if something happened to your beautiful house. Some people just don't fit in our neighborhood." She always left it hanging, as if you should read between the lines. Mrs. Reynolds' lawyer, a middle-aged woman with thick glasses, tried to discredit my testimony, suggesting that I was being oversensitive and paranoid. "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it true that Mrs. Reynolds was just trying to uphold the historic standards of the neighborhood? That her actions came from a genuine love for the community? Hiring a convicted criminal to break into my house doesn't show love for the community," I replied calmly. "Nor does faking documents or dumping rotting meat in my garden." The most surprising part of the trial came when other neighbors began testifying. Martin Lewis, a retired college professor living 3 houses down, described how Patricia had orchestrated a similar campaign against his family when they refused to remove a maple tree from their yard. "We ended up moving after 6 months of psychological terror," he concluded, avoiding eye contact with Patricia. Eleanor Whitman, a 78-year-old widow who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, revealed that Patricia kept an unofficial rule book and collected voluntary contributions for the so-called Oakwood Hills Preservation Fund, money that was apparently never publicly accounted for. "Why did no one report this before?" the judge asked, visibly perplexed. Eleanor looked at her wrinkled hands. "We were scared, Your Honor. Anyone who got in her way ended up having accidents or became targets of strange municipal inspections." After a few incidents, we learned not to cross Patricia Reynolds. After 3 days of hearings, the verdict was announced. Patricia Reynolds was found guilty of conspiracy for criminal harassment, intimidation, attempted proxy break-in, document forgery, and postal fraud. The sentence: 3 years in state prison, 5 years of probation following that, and a permanent restraining order banning her from coming within 500 meters of my residence. When the judge banged his gavel, Patricia finally lost it. "You don't understand! I built this neighborhood. I protected it. Without me, Oakwood Hills will fall apart like any rundown suburb." As the officers took her away, she shouted at me, "It's not over, Sullivan. You destroyed everything I built." I stayed calm, but her words echoed in my mind for weeks. The morning after the trial, I found a bouquet of flowers on my porch with an anonymous card. "Thanks for doing what no one else dared." In the following days, other neighbors started coming up to me, tentatively at first, as if testing if it was safe. Patricia's house was put up for sale 2 months later. Apparently, her son, who lived in another state, decided she wouldn't go back to the neighborhood even after her sentence was served. A young family with 2 small kids bought it, and I couldn't help but note the irony when they began painting the facade a cheerful yellow that would undoubtedly have horrified the former owner. Slowly, the neighborhood began to change. Robert Chang, who lived on the corner, organized a community barbecue at the local park. The first in 15 years, he claimed. Patricia used to say that social events brought in undesirable elements to the neighborhood, he said while handing me a beer. Over time, everyone just stopped trying. I realized that Patricia's house wasn't the only one on the market. Several properties changed hands in the following months, as if the community was undergoing a major transformation. New faces appeared, young families, young professionals, all drawn by the same architectural beauty and sense of history that had captured me. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the trial, Eleanor Whitman knocked on my door. I invited her over for tea in the backyard, where I had set up a small pavilion among the trees. "You know, Jack," she said, wrapping her wrinkled hands around her cup, "Patricia wasn't always like this. When she first moved here, almost 30 years ago, she was just a young mother determined to build a safe place for her son. What happened? Life, I guess. Her husband left her. Her son grew up and moved away. She was left alone with this huge house and slowly started imposing her need for control on the neighborhood." Eleanor sighed. At first, her suggestions even made some sense. The neighborhood was falling apart. Some people really neglected maintenance. But over time, power went right to her head. Did anyone try to stop her? Oh yes, there were a few who did. The Rodriguez family, who lived where the Petersons are now, tried to set up a real homeowners association with proper bylaws and elections. 3 months later, Mr. Rodriguez mysteriously lost his job, and his wife began getting anonymous letters hinting he was having an affair. They moved out before Christmas. I nodded, impressed by the extent of Patricia's influence. "Why are you telling me this now, Eleanor?" She set her cup down on the table and looked me straight in the eye. "Because you need to understand what you did for us, Jack. It wasn't just about you. It was about freeing an entire neighborhood from decades of fear. And also, because we have to stay vigilant so this never happens again." Her words stayed with me as I continued restoring my house. I kept the security cameras, not out of paranoia, but just to be safe. The alarm system stayed on, and I never replaced the reinforced locks with simpler ones. The following fall, I received a letter from the state penitentiary. I immediately recognized Patricia's meticulous handwriting on the envelope. I stared at it for a long while, trying to decide whether to open it or just throw it away. In the end, curiosity got the better of me. "Sullivan, I hope you're happy with the chaos you've created. I heard that the new owner of the Mitchell house put in a trampoline in the front yard." A trampoline! And that awful fence the new owners of my old house built. It isn't even lined up properly with the sidewalk. Don't you realize that I was the only thing stopping Oakwood Hills from turning into just another decaying suburb? Everything I built over decades is now being undone because of you. One day you'll understand that I was right. Patricia Reynolds. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away in a drawer in my office. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of the danger of unchecked power and the importance of standing firm against intimidation. That night, I took a walk around the neighborhood at dusk. Kids were playing in their yards. An elderly couple strolled hand in hand, and yes, there was a trampoline in the Mitchell's lawn. I also noticed new blooming gardens, some houses with more vibrant colors, and even a small cafe that had opened on the corner of Main Street. All changes that would have horrified Patricia. But what stood out the most was the sound of laughter and conversation drifting down the streets. Oakwood Hills still held its historic charm and architectural beauty, but now there was something new in the air: freedom. People finally felt comfortable transforming their houses into real homes without the fear of backlash or judgment. As I walked home at dusk, I felt a deep gratitude for not only finding the house I'd been searching for, but also the strength to defend it, and, without meaning to help an entire community regain its voice. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get more stories like this. I kept up my routine as a furniture restorer, bringing beauty and functionality back to old pieces that many thought were beyond saving. In a way, I realized I'd done the same for Oakwood Hills, helped restore something precious that was nearly lost under layers of fear and control. It wasn't the future I imagined when I bought that Victorian house, but I realized it was exactly where I was meant to be.